The best drummers in the world sound awesome on the hi-hats, and you can too. But there might be a few things stopping you. I've noticed in my teaching experience that a lot of drummers are leaving money on the table, so to speak, when it comes to their hat playing. They could easily do a lot better with some simple adjustments. I want you to employ these 5 controversial hi-hat hacks to improve your sound, speed, and fluidity, and even creativity on the hi-hats. You can do this. Hey, welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. I'm so glad you're hanging out with me here today. I'm here to help you become the drummer that everybody wants to play with and listen to. And we do this by teaching you the core skills that actually help you grow quickly and save you a lot of time in the practice room. Hey, while you're here, I have a free gift for you. If you have a weak hand, if both of your hands don't operate really well together, like if one hand is always ahead of the other and one hand's lagging behind, I've got something for you. This really cool free resource is going to help you out. It's my mini course called Eliminate Your Weak Hand in 3 Steps. You can go through the course and learn everything you need to know to even out your hand so there's no longer a weak hand holding you back. Because you're only ever going to be as good as your weakest limb. And when there's a weak hand, that can really mess things up. But when you solve your weak hand, the sky's the limit in terms of the hand freedom you can achieve. So dive into it. Totally free course, no brainer. 3 steps to eliminating your weak hand in the description below. My gift to you. All right, on with today's lesson. You really might be leaving money on the table with your hi-hat playing. I believe you can get a lot more speed and fluidity than you might think. And my goal today is to show you exactly how to do that. These are simple adjustment kinds of things, like adjusting the way we hit the hats, the way we adjust the hi-hats themselves, and you get a lot of quick, instant results, which is what's so fun about this. So let's dive in. Number 1, hack number 1. This is the only cymbal spacing you should do, and it should look about like this. What we want to do is have more space than you think you need between the cymbals, at least an inch. Now, adjusting for bottom hat angle, because you do want to have a little bit of bottom hat angle. You can see over here on the closest side, we're probably about an inch, maybe slightly less than an inch apart. Over here on the further away side, it might be closer to 1.25 inches or so. That's a good spot, like 1.25 inches maybe on average, 3 centimeters. That's a good sweet spot. Why do we want to do this? Because if you don't allow enough space here, you can't do firm, commanding, precise chicks like that, or splashes. Or sizzles, where we gradually close them. And so in order to get that full range of sound potential out of our hi-hats, we have to have some space here. It's just like allowing stick height when you're playing. You can only do so much with your sticks if you're only allowing yourself that stick height. Now the reason this is controversial, and you might know why this is controversial, I get a lot of pushback on this because a lot of people would rather take kind of the easy route, I guess, and leave their hats about right here. That way, if they've got their foot on them, they've got a closed hat sound. If they take their foot off, they've got an open hat sound. You're not having to worry about precisely, closing them to the right spot with your foot. Instead, they're there automatically. And a lot of metal drummers like to do this because then you can take your foot off the hi-hat, have it on double bass, and be playing open hat sounds. So that's why this is kind of a controversial move. But here's the deal. If you want to take the kind of the easy road with this, I strongly recommend you have a second set of hi-hats dedicated to that. Like if you want to have another pair of hi-hats mounted somewhere else that are just always adjusted to right here, so they are your default open hats, then great. Go for that. That's cool. But you need to have your main pair of hi-hats like this so that you've got the maximum expression capabilities, so you can actually get a lot of sounds. And also when you're playing open notes, those open notes sound pretty dull if there's only one sound of open note you can play, and it's this. If that's all you can do, that's kind of boring. But when you've got some space here to move, that allows you to go. You can do a lot of cool stuff, where you can strike them when they're loose and then open them up and then close them back down. You can have a much more firm closing, ending to your open note when you've got that space. You can play stronger chicks, better splashes, etc., etc. I think I presented my argument there, my case for this. I strongly recommend you have more space between your hats. I know it might feel weird at first if you're not used to it, but do it, you will thank me later. Controversial hack number 2, the clutch looseness sweet spot. Loosen your top hat. Make sure that your top hat is not like snuffed out, squished here within the clutch. So most hi-hat clutches have this kind of piece down here on the underside. And so you can tighten this all the way and then use the top washers here to get it nice and loose, or you can loosen this bottom part, and a lot of times there's a little screw that goes in here and you can tighten that screw to allow this to actually not be on all the way but not come off if you've got the screw in. I don't know where my screw is, but I tightened it down all the way so it always stays in place. But you can use these top washers here, these top nuts, to gradually loosen it up. You want to make sure that you've got some mobility here. There needs to be some looseness here. The reason why there's some pushback on this one is that the looser your top pad is, the trickier it is to get nice, clean, precise sounds. Because when you play a closed note, let's say the top pad is super tight. Let's say you've clamped down your clutch. I see so many beginner drummers do this. They've got the clutch super tight because the whole idea is, well, the cymbal needs to be secure. If there's an option to tighten something, we got to tighten it down all the way. It's kind of like how, total side tangent, but I've taught a lot of beginner kids over the years, and I've had dads of beginner kids tell me, oh yeah, I got out my screwdriver and we tightened down those drum heads. We put those heads on the drum so fast, going at it with the screwdriver. And so I always laugh because it's hilarious, but I always have to tell them, you're going to tear up your drums. Don't do that. Don't tune your drums with a screwdriver. It might seem fast, but it's going to tear them up. Just because there's something there to be tightened doesn't mean it needs to be tightened all the way. And I think most of us understand that once we learn anything about drums. But I've had parents of beginner students that do crazy things like that. But that totally applies to the hi-hat clutch too. It doesn't need to be super tight. Instead, you want to have the looseness. The reason why a lot of drummers like to have it tighter is because if it's tight, you can play an easier, very crisp closed note. Versus if it's loose, you barely let up on your foot. My foot's still here in contact with the foot plate, but it's suddenly getting sloshy. So having a looser top hat comes at the expense of having to use more foot pressure on the foot plate to play a tightly closed note. So if I want to play very tightly, I have to lift my heel and press down with my big toe. As soon as I rest my heel and don't actively try to press down with my foot, we've got that. But here's the thing, if you have your top hat totally tight, you can't get all these in-between sounds. You're either going to be tight, or you start to get loose, and then suddenly right here, because this is so tight, the cymbals can't interact with each other and you don't get that nice sizzly sound. If you want a cool sizzly open hat sound like this, and the infinite number of degrees of openness like this, so many different degrees of it, and as you hit harder, you can have them open a little more and have them sloshing around a bunch. So it gives you so much potential, so much sound potential when it's loose, that it's totally worth the cost of having to press down a little more for the tight notes. So I think that's why there's some pushback on that, because it is harder to get a tightly closed note if you're loose. But your hats have got to be loose to get that full sound potential. That's what all this is going to come down to. You can get more sound potential, creativity, more versatility out of your hats when you adjust them the way I'm showing you. It might come at the cost of something involving your technique, but it's nothing that you can't achieve, nothing that you can't overcome. Sometimes you got to work a little bit harder, build a new technical habit, but you're going to be just fine. Controversial hi-hat hack number 3. The ideal hi-hat height. What I want you to do is lower your hats, probably. I don't know exactly what your setup looks like, but most likely your hats actually ought to be a little bit lower in relation to your snare. Now, this is kind of a tricky thing, I get a lot of debating on this one for a few reasons, but the big one, the lower your hats are, the more likely your hands are to get tangled up. And so most drummers will opt to have their hats as high as possible, because if your hats are way up here, kind of like if I'm hitting my crash up here, my hands are not going to get tangled, my sticks are not going to clash. But as the hats get lower, we start to run into this. And so that's where there's a lot of pushback with this, because students would rather have their hats higher so that there's more clearance here. But here's my big reason why I want you to do this. I want you to be able to relax your arm. If you ever watch like these big dramatic monkey arm rock drummers playing with rock bands, you'll see they've got their hats way up here and they're going like this as they hit them. They got their elbow way out here, and maybe their cymbals are up super high, so you just got this ridiculousness. Nobody needs to play that way. That's all for flash, all for looks, having the cymbals super high. The lower you have your cymbals, you don't want them, right down next to your drums. You want to have some clearance for the microphones too. That way the mics don't pick up a whole lot of cymbal. You want to have the cymbals kind of in their own sonic space up here. But you don't want them so high that you're having to hurt your shoulders and play like this. And so with your hats, the lower you can get them, the more you can actually relax your arm. If we're down here, it's a very relaxing position. I could do this all day. Versus if I'm up here all the time, it's not that it's going to harm my arm. It's just, it's more tiresome having to hold my arm up here. But I'm not riding on my crash all the time like I am on my ride, which I have a little bit lower. And so the places where I'm riding, I'm keeping time all the time, I want to have those things that, roughly this height, where it's about 6-7 inches above the snare drum. So what I want you to start with, whatever height you have your snare, it's going to be different depending on your height. I'm tall, you might be shorter. So we're talking ratios here. So that's why I'm not giving you a height above the floor for your hi-hats, but instead a height above your snare. With a Vic Firth stick, it's about to the H or so in Firth with any like 5A or 5B stick. And so aim for that. Start with that. See how that feels. If it's not working for you after a few days, try to give it a few more days. Try to give it a week or so. It takes time to make adjustments like this on our kits if we're used to something that we've been doing for a long time. But after a few weeks, if it's not working, it's okay. Go back to where it was. But I strongly recommend you lower it so that you can relax your arm a bit. Now this leads into our hack number 4, which in order to do this hack number 4, we have to have the hats a little bit lower. So if you've got your hats at about 6 inches, you're going to be able to perfect that stick angle. Because number 4 is we want to find the perfect stick angle, which is generally less stick angle. So the hack is, instead of playing like this, where you're like going at it, go a little more like this, which is easier to do when the hats are lower, right? If the hats were way up here, it would be easy to hack at them like this, and we're just destroying our sticks. We got sawdust going everywhere, but we feel cool and we feel awesome, like we're heavy rock drummers if we're doing that. Been there, done that. In high school, my goal was to shred my sticks on my hi-hats, believe it or not. So I was hitting them as hard as I could, and that was not good. But that's another story. If you lower your hats, you can adjust your angle, and if you're hitting them at less of an angle, number 1, you'll tear up your sticks less. Number 2, the hi-hats will sound better. Number 3, you're going to get more smoothness and fluidity and speed because you get a better response this way. If you're hitting the hats like this, like let's talk molar. Let's say we're doing an accent tap one-handed molar pattern. If we're going like this, that requires effort, especially if we're at a steep angle. It's just sheer going at it. But if we lessen the angle, once we get to like right here, it gets so much easier because suddenly there's a tiny bit of rebound. There's no rebound here. I mean, I guess there's a tiny bit, but not much. If you lessen your angle, if the hats are tightly closed, there's actually a little bit of a hop there. It's not much. You're never going to get a lot of rebound out of your hats unless you're playing on the top, which most of the time, if we want any volume out of them, we're not going to. So there's not going to be a lot of rebound, but you got to go for as much as you can get. Any little bit of rebound is going to help here. I think the reason that I get some pushback on this is because you don't get as much volume. You do sacrifice volume if you're wanting more speed and fluidity. It's difficult to get speed and fluidity and just buttery smoothness on the hats while maintaining volume. But think about this musically. If you're trying to play like a Rosanna pattern, or just any kind of like straight 16th pattern, that doesn't need to be loud. That's more of a light floating along sort of thing, versus something loud might be, maybe it's looser, sloshier, maybe it's open hats. And so it's that heavier kind of sound. And most likely if you're needing to be heavier or louder, you're not playing as fast. So you can switch back and forth. You can play like this if you're wanting to be louder and heavier, and then go to here if you're wanting to be lighter and quicker, especially if it's this kind of groove. Or if it's any kind of like Latin pattern. Anything like that is going to be very light on the hats, and you might even go on top. If it's a Latin kind of thing, you might just go on top of the hats, and in that case, it's a lot of rebound, it's very effortless. But if you want a little bit more thickness and smoothness and kind of a fluid feel to it, it helps to go to about right here. And hi-hat hack number 5, guess what? I already spoiled it because we're already kind of getting into that with the whole stick angle thing. Instead of playing here, even if you've got the slight angle right here, instead of being there, slide out to here. Be as close to the tip as you can comfortably get without just missing the hi-hat. Because I have had students take this to the extreme and play like this. And sometimes the stick just misses. That can be a little dangerous, 2 reasons. One, if you're playing really close to the edge with the tip, you might accidentally chip the tip of your stick with the edge of the cymbal. And then 2, you might just miss and then come down here and either hit your knee, hit the rim of the snare. That's messy. And you'll feel like a total amateur if you do that. I've done that so many times where I just like miss something or like smash a finger between the stick and the floor tom. It's okay, we've all been there. But try to give yourself a little bit of headroom here by not being all the way out here. I think you can definitely get the ideal rebound while hitting the edge of the hats if you're super close to the tip of the stick. But it also starts to really thin out where there's not a lot of thickness to the sound. We don't always want it to be that thin, so we might want to go about right here. You kind of have to find your sweet spot depending on what you're playing, but I've found that if it's like a light shuffle sort of pattern, like then you're going to be best off being like right here. Now notice if I ever played an open note, I reached in more. And that's what you want to keep in mind. This is not a set in stone static sort of thing. When you're playing quickly, be right here. But as soon as you want to throw in an open note, that's where the angle and that's where the digging in comes into play. This is not black and white one or the other. You've got to be okay with going back and forth. So when you're playing quickly, be here. But as soon as there's an open note involved, dig in a little more. So you're just doing what you got to do to manipulate the sound and get the maximum sound capabilities out of your hats. That's what this all comes down to. If you're trying to get that buttery smooth 16th feel, like Rosanna, like Africa, I always think of Jeff Porcaro grooves because I think he's the master of this. Those kinds of patterns, you have to have less angle and less stick on the hats. You can't play like this. Can't play like this. Your snare won't allow you anyways. Can't play like this. You also don't want to be like this. You don't want to be here. You want to be on the neck of the stick, less angle. And having the hats lower definitely helps with that. And in order to transition and get really smooth, really nice musical open notes, you've got to have that loose top hat also. And then lastly, you've got to make sure you've got that space. So these are very simple things. These are very simple, achievable things. And as you've been following along, I hope you've been actually like sitting there messing with your hats. You'll find that if you adjust the top cymbal loosely, give yourself some bottom hat angle, give yourself some space, lower your hats to 6-7 inches above your snare, then work on building the habit of adjusting that angle. That might mean moving your hats further away, might be moving them further this way, further that way, whatever you've got to do, wherever you've got to move your hats so that this becomes a comfortable position. Focus on that. My guess is that that's what you'll need to practice most here because the first few things were just adjustment things. That's easy. But you've got to build new habits of stick placement. It's kind of like thinking about where on a cymbal you're hitting. Like when you're playing on the right, are you hitting close to the bell or close to the edge? Be aware of those things. Like what kind of sound are you getting out of your drums? And so be thinking about that here on the hi-hat. So make these adjustments, reposition your hats if you need to based on height and based on placement so you can build these new technique motion habits here. And I hope that this helps you not leave money on the table. I want you to play to your full potential. If you can sound awesome on the hi-hats, you're going to gain so much confidence with your groove making because the hi-hats are a challenging but very musical part of the kit. And if you can master them, you're going to feel great. You're going to feel like a confident and musical drummer. And so I hope that this is encouraging and helps empower you to do this and really sound great on the hats. I'll link some more videos in the description going in more depth with different hi-hat techniques, whether it's molar or whether it's doing barks, like, doing quick notes like that and all these different techniques that go into the hats, leg bounce, different foot techniques. There's so much we can talk about. But it all starts with these things today. So if this lesson has helped you out, definitely check out the ones in the description where we go more in depth with all these specific techniques that'll help you do all the cool stuff you hear on your favorite records that requires a lot of hand, left foot coordination, but so cool what you can do. I hope that this has empowered you to go into that. And hey, leave me a comment below. Tell me which of these was most helpful to you. Maybe you've been employing some of these tips already. Maybe you've watched a lot of my lessons, and so maybe I'm preaching to the choir here for some of you. But tell me, what jumped out at you? Like what's something that you can go change right now that you know is going to change your hi-hat playing? Because it's time for you to take action. Let me know in a comment below. And hey, before you go enroll in my Eliminate Your Weak Hand in 3 Steps mini course. It's a total no-brainer. The course is free, and it's going to help you eliminate that annoying weak hand that's been holding you back. Maybe you've wanted to be able to play open-handed so you can play on the hats while moving around on the toms. This course is going to help you do that. We dig into all the technical stuff for making sure that your left hand is working as well as your right, and then we work on getting it coordinated. The sky's the limit when you actually dig in and you practice this stuff. So know that you don't have to deal with a weak hand any longer. You can master it. Go dig into the course, 3 steps to eliminating your weak hand right now. You can do this. All right, thanks so much for hanging out today. Thanks for being a part of my day here. I've enjoyed hanging out with you and teaching this to you. I hope this has been super helpful. I'll see you on the next lesson. Stay non-glamorous.